In the middle of Charles Dickens's 1843 classic A Christmas Carol, there is a scene that captures the absolute height of working-class holiday joy. The Cratchits, a family living on the edge of poverty, are preparing their Christmas dinner. Dickens describes the excitement as the young Cratchits carried their dinner to the table in a procession. It is a goose stuffed with sage and onions and served with applesauce and mashed potatoes. For the Cratchits, this bird is not just food. It is a marvel, a rare and magnificent feast that fills the entire house with its rich, savory aroma. At the time, this scene resonated with millions of readers across Victorian England. The roasted goose was the undisputed king of the winter table, a traditional centerpiece of celebration for rich and poor alike. But if you walk into a modern supermarket today in London, New York, or Paris in the weeks leading up to Christmas, you will find a very different landscape. You will see mountains of frozen turkeys, shelves packed with chickens, and perhaps a few ducks. But the goose is almost entirely absent. If you do manage to find one, it will likely be tucked away in a specialty section, carrying a price tag that would shock Bob Cratchit. A bird that was once the default choice for a family feast has virtually vanished from the Western diet. We eat billions of pounds of poultry every year, yet we have almost completely stopped eating the one bird that defined our culinary history. To understand how this happened, we have to look past the changing tastes of modern consumers. The disappearance of the goose is not a story of a food going out of style. Instead, it is a story of a silent revolution in how we farm, a clash between the biological nature of waterbirds and the demands of modern industrial capitalism. The goose did not leave our tables because we stopped liking it. It disappeared because it is a bird that stubbornly refused to be industrialized. Before the 20th century, the goose was the perfect agricultural machine for a pre-industrial world. Unlike chickens or turkeys, which require grain and seeds, geese are primarily herbivores. They are grazers. Their digestive systems are uniquely adapted to process large quantities of grass and fiber, thanks to a highly developed gizzard and a large cecum filled with microbial flora. This biological trait made them incredibly cheap to raise for rural families. A peasant farmer did not need to buy expensive grain to feed a flock of geese. They simply turned them out onto the common village pasture. Geese also played a vital role in the post-harvest cycle. After the autumn wheat and barley crops were harvested, farmers would release flocks of geese into the empty fields. The birds would walk through the rows, eating the spilled grain and weeds left in the stubble. This practice, known as gleaning, served a double purpose. It cleaned the fields of pests and weeds for the next planting season, and it allowed the geese to fatten themselves up at zero cost to the farmer. By late autumn, they were plump, heavy, and ready for market. This natural cycle is why geese were traditionally eaten during Michaelmas in late September and throughout the winter holidays. They were at their absolute peak of fatness, fueled entirely by the leftovers of the harvest. But the goose was far more than just a source of meat. It was an essential multi-utility animal for the household economy. For centuries, the goose was the engine of Western literature, philosophy, and administration. Every document, from Shakespeare's plays to Isaac Newton's scientific treatise, was written using quill pens harvested from the wings of geese. A single goose could yield several high-quality quills from its outer wing feathers. In the early 19th century, Great Britain alone consumed tens of millions of goose quills every year. Furthermore, goose feathers and down provided the insulation for the beds and pillows of Europe. Goose fat was treated as a precious commodity. It was used as a long-lasting cooking oil, a rust-preventing lubricant for farm machinery, and a staple of folk medicine, believed to cure everything from earaches to chest congestion. The goose was a self-sustaining, self-feeding asset that paid for itself many times over before it ever reached the dinner table. However, as the Industrial Revolution gathered pace, the relationship between humans and agriculture shifted. Cities grew rapidly, and the demand for cheap, mass-produced protein skyrocketed. To feed these growing urban populations, agriculture had to transition from small-scale pasture farming to high-density, centralized industrial production. This transition, which created the modern factory farm, was highly successful for chickens and turkeys. But for the goose, it was a biological dead end. The first major obstacle was space. Geese are highly territorial, aggressive water birds. They require large open pastures to graze and access to water to clean themselves and maintain their plumage. When researchers and farmers tried to confine geese to high-density indoor barns, the standard method for raising modern broiler chickens, the results were disastrous. Under the stress of confinement, geese develop severe behavioral issues. They become highly aggressive, feather-pecking and injuring one another. Their legs, built for walking long distances on soft grass and swimming, easily deform on the hard, dry bedding of commercial poultry barns. The second, and perhaps most critical barrier was reproduction. To run a successful industrial poultry operation, you need a constant, predictable supply of eggs and chicks throughout the year. A modern laying chicken has been selectively bred to lay up to 300 eggs a year, almost independent of the season. Turkeys, while less prolific, can still produce around 80 to 100 eggs annually under controlled lighting. Geese, however, are stubbornly seasonal breeders. They respond strongly to the natural length of daylight and will only lay eggs during a brief window in the spring. A domestic goose lays only 30 to 50 eggs per year. Once she lays a small clutch of 12 to 15 eggs, her natural maternal instinct kicks in, and she becomes broody, refusing to lay more and insisting on sitting on the nest to hatch them. Breaking this broody cycle in a commercial setting is incredibly difficult. Additionally, goose mating habits do not align with mass production. Geese often form monogamous pairs or small, selective harems. They require water to mate comfortably and successfully. While the turkey industry bypassed reproductive challenges by adopting artificial insemination, a practice now used for nearly all commercial turkeys, artificial insemination in geese is notoriously difficult due to their complex anatomy and lower semen volume. The economic consequence of these biological limits is stark. To a commercial hatchery, raising chickens or turkeys is like operating a money-printing press that runs 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. Raising geese, by contrast, is like owning a seasonal machine that you can only run for a few weeks in the spring before mothballing it for the rest of the year. Because of the low egg yield and poor fertility rates, each gosling is expensive to produce. Indeed, the cost of just buying a single baby gosling is often higher than the cost of raising an entire chicken to market weight. This biological divide created a massive price gap during the mid-20th century. Following World War II, the industrialization of chicken and turkey farming succeeded on an unprecedented scale. Through selective breeding, high-protein grain diets, and climate-controlled barns, the time it took to raise a chicken plummeted, and the cost of poultry meat dropped to historic lows. Turkey, once a luxury meat reserved for the wealthy, became cheap and abundant. Meanwhile, goose production remained stuck in the past. Because they could not be factory farmed, geese had to be raised on open pastures, requiring more land, more labor, and more time. The price of goose meat stayed high while the price of chicken and turkey fell. Over a few decades, the economic roles reversed. The goose, once the affordable holiday bird of the Victorian working class, became an expensive luxury. The turkey, once the luxury of the elite, became the cheap default for the masses. But the shift was not purely economic. It was also practical. The modern Western kitchen, shaped by convenience and speed, is poorly suited for cooking a goose. Waterfowl need a thick layer of subcutaneous fat to stay warm in cold water and to provide buoyancy. When you roast a goose, this fat melts away. The kitchen fills with smoke, and a massive amount of liquid grease drains into the roasting pan. This fat rendering process means that a goose loses a significant portion of its raw weight during cooking. In a way, buying a raw goose is like buying a block of ice on a summer day. A massive portion of what you pay for simply melts away, leaving a surprisingly modest core behind. A 10-pound goose might only yield enough meat to feed 4 or 5 people, whereas a 10-pound turkey, which has very little fat and a high meat-to-bone ratio, can easily feed double that number. Furthermore, Western consumers developed a strong preference for lean white meat, specifically breast meat. The turkey has been bred to have breasts so large that the birds can no longer fly or even mate naturally. The goose, by contrast, is a flying bird with dark, rich, gamey meat throughout. It tastes more like duck or beef than chicken, which does not appeal to a modern public raised on the mild, neutral flavor of industrial chicken. Today, the goose exists as a relic of a bygone culinary era. In countries like Germany, Poland, and parts of France, the tradition of eating goose for Martinmas or Christmas has managed to survive, supported by local cultural pride. But in the wider English-speaking world, the bird has been almost completely displaced. In the end, the story of the goose is a reminder of what we lose when we optimize our food system purely for efficiency and scale. We traded the rich, aromatic fat and deep flavor of the pasture-raised goose for the cheap, dry convenience of the industrial turkey. The Cratchits Christmas goose was a celebration of nature's seasonal abundance, a bird that connected the household to the rhythm of the harvest. Today, that connection is gone, replaced by a bird engineered for the assembly line. The goose did not leave our tables because we fell out of love with it. It left because in a world that demanded everything be standardized, cheap, and fast, the goose chose to remain wild.